And the topic that we have been lately bringing attention to for quite some weeks now about these centers, the functions. So the functions, the centers, the intellectual center, emotion center, moving center, instinctive center. This is sex center that will put it away, put it on side for now. So these are functions of this human being biocomputer machine. And all animals, they have some of these centers, and according to the fourth way, only the human being machine has intellect. So all the mammals, they have this emotional center, moving center, instinctive center, sex center. But only in the human being, there's this emergence of the intellectual center. And there were, it seems like, experiments on this with gorillas and chimps. You know, if you guys know the Coco, there's a very intelligent gorilla who had totally, there's intellectual center there. And actually it seemed much more emotionally open and loving than like vast majority of humanity. This being said, there's the difference, you know, the human being, even if one is actually deep in ego and selfish, narcissistic, and nasty individual, that we have very complex intellect that can, you know, visualize, can have abstract thoughts, can create totally destructive theories with which we justify killing millions of people. So that's the intellect. So yeah, we are going to talk about, go a little bit more. We talked before, but we are going to go for the moving and instinctive center. And throughout the last months, we had exercises around observing the moving center and the instinctive center. And so when we talk about these centers, what we are trying to do here, Peter and myself, to first of all give a little bit of how the machine works and what each center does if it were to be healthy and functioning correctly. However, as Gurdjieff said, we don't start with a clean, brand new machine. When we start in a work, we start with a machine that worked completely wrong for a long time. So now it's kind of rusty and it's disjointed. That's why we also, when we speak about the centers, we are speaking about in which way a particular center or function, let's say, displaces presence or tends to be highly mechanical in a way that we are asleep. And so that's practical for our work, like what we used to do, this mechanical efficiency, these various exercises that we've done all these months are around observing some, they call it the wrong work of center. Another way for that would be unconscious mechanical operating of that center while we are in self-forgetfulness. And then also how to introduce, we'll talk about how to introduce various, how to use each center to increase more frequency and duration. So here I would, and we'll stay with the moving instinctive center, and I will have Peter, and hold your question somehow, and if something comes, kind of write it down or keep it in mind. And each center has, each center is like a floor of the house. And each floor has kind of 3 subdivisions. So each center, regardless emotional, moving, instinctive, has 3 subdivisions. So there is the, let's say, taking for instance the moving center, there is the moving part of the moving center, there is the emotional part of the moving center, there's the intellectual part of the moving center. And we use this also terminology connected with the deck of cards. where the moving center is the spades, and the moving part of the moving center is the jack. The emotional part of the moving center is the queen of spades, and the intellectual part of the moving center is the king of spades. And so on goes with each center. The instinctive center has the moving part of the instinctive center, the emotional part of the instinctive center, and the intellectual part of the instinctive center being the clubs. And so there's the jack of clubs and the queen of clubs and the king of clubs. So we're going to stay with these two, and I will pass it to Peter to maybe explain a little bit more about these subdivisions and also how that all of them are designed by the designer of this infinite universe. So it's like a very good engineering here. And none of them is wrong. They're all useful for life. And yeah, I'll pass it to you before we go into each one of them.
Just for a general
Yeah, for the general
overview.
Like you want to say something else before we go into the movie center.
I think a good way to start is, and I think by now many of you already know this, that what distinguishes the three parts of each center is how it operates with attention. So the general idea is that the moving part, which would be like the lower story of each center, can operate with little or no attention. So in the case of the moving center, for example, once you learn a movement, you can do it with almost no attention, minimal attention. You can reach into the drawer in the kitchen and get the knife or a fork. You know exactly where it is. The moving center knows where it is. You don't really look, you kind of vaguely see it. You open the drawer, you get it. You know how to put toothpaste on the toothbrush. You know, not you. It's actually the moving center does it by itself now, with very little attention required. Tying your shoes, opening the front door, starting the car. All these movements, which we've learned, are now settled into this moving part of the moving center. And they operate by themselves automatically and primarily with little or no attention. That's the description we've used for many years. It's very helpful. And then the emotional part of each center is characterized by the attention being drawn out, being drawn by something. We become very interested in something. We become very invested in something. And in the case of the moving center, it would take the form of, for example, getting into a fast-moving momentum. And now we're always forward charging and our momentum picks up. But because by virtue of the fact that it's moving faster, there has to be a little more attention. And so, but what one form this can take is pleasure of movement. So movement can be, in this sense, emotional. This is the emotional part of the moving center. So dance, or even when you're doing things, if you watch a good chef, you'll see their moving center. It's more than just the moving part of the moving center sometimes. There's a grace, an elegance, a charm almost to their movements. And this is true in different professions. And it's certainly true in dance, is one of the more obvious. And you see it in ballet, you can see it in sports, in athletics. And then the other side, there's also a positive and a negative half of each center in theory. And you can look for this too. So for example, in the moving center, the positive half doesn't mean good compared to bad. It just means there's a positive charge of energy in the form of pleasure. It's pleasurable to be moving. You get down to the beach as a child and you want to run to the ocean. There's a pleasure, an abandon, a freedom. And now this movement has an emotional aspect of its own. It's not emotion, it's emotional movement. And the negative half of this moving center, the emotional part of the moving center, is when we have our momentums interrupted. And so we're moving, we're trying to get something done, everything's flowing well, and now there's an impediment, an obstacle, an interruption, this kind of thing. And now there's a negative taint, a negative charge to the moving center because it's been interrupted. The intellectual part of each center is characterized by us actually having to control attention, bring more attention to what we're doing. If we're learning something new, or if you, for example, you know how when you cut vegetables, you have to, with a knife on the cutting board, and you have to curl your fingers so you don't chop your fingers off when you cut. Pardon me. We have to learn how to do that very carefully. You have to be very careful, very attentive, very intentional. And this idea of being intentional, being purposeful, attentive, characterizes the intellectual parts of centers. And it's one way to think about developing or strengthening this muscle that's called the intellectual part of the moving center. To do things like this that require doing them carefully, but doing things intentionally. You can brush your teeth intentionally. You can squeeze the toothpaste onto the brush intentionally, purposely. And now this is closer to awareness itself. Now awareness is right there. It's right there at the top of attention, controlled attention. It's not controlled attention. Controlled attention is an effort. And now I'm going to try to control my attention when I brush my teeth. Every little stroke, I'm going to be purposely aware of each movement for the sake of controlling attention. It's very different than just, done. And when we do it more intentionally, initially, it can help us be more present. It's not an end in itself, of course. A lot of exercises that we propose are exercises that will foster the intellectual parts of centers for this reason, to bring us out of the moving part of centers, to rise above just automatic, we can say unconscious movement, to through the emotional parts of movement, which are actually also can happen by themselves with not much consciousness, even though they require more attention, and into the intellectual part of the moving center in this case, where when we do, by virtue of doing things with more attention, it can serve as sort of a launching pad for awareness to realize itself. Now awareness is there, witnessing all this movement. So there's sort of like, there can become like a marriage between the intellectual parts of centers and awareness. The intellectual parts of centers service awareness and yield to awareness. And in this way, it can become very beautiful. And the moving center, it sort of glides through the moment. It's always moving through the moment. Rarely is our moving center actually attentive to the moment. Rarely is the attention, I should say, in the moving center attentive to the moment. For that to happen, we have to be in the intellectual part. And we also, the more we're trying to remember ourselves, or we are aware of being aware of ourselves, the more this happens. And so when we slow down movement, when we use intentional movement and we actually slow down our movement, this is a way of sort of bringing all of our attention into the present and into presence. And this yielding, this marriage, this exchange between attention and awareness can happen more consistently, more effectively. It doesn't mean we have to live our life in slow motion, but it's a good exercise sometimes. If you're brushing your teeth, if you're reaching for the spoon in the kitchen drawer, if you're just walking across the room, try to go slowly. Don't move through the moment, be in the moment. Don't be moving to the next thing, be doing the thing you are doing. And this idea, of course, multitasking is overrated, and it's really a misnomer. I think science has proven you actually can't multitask because you're always switching back and forth. You can switch back and forth very quickly, but you can't do one thing. So just to make the cup of tea, that's all you need to do, one thing. But this slowing down of movement is a way to actually slow down all the other centers. Because, in the Gurdjieff's analogy, and it wasn't just his analogy, it was an early Eastern analogy of the horse, the wagon, and the driver. this wagon gets going, this moving center, the wheels of it, they get rolling downhill and start running away. You know, even it's too much for the horse. The horse is theoretically pulling it, but when it gets going downhill, everybody's at the mercy now of this wagon rolling downhill. And that's what happens to our centers when the moving center gets going of its own accord. And so slowing down the moving center with attention and with intention is a very practical way to start to see what's going on with awareness, with our awareness, and not just our attention, but our awareness. Because normally we don't see what's around us. You know, we're cooking and we reach for this and we do that and we dry our hands on a towel and something in the drying rack or empty the dishwasher. We're just moving, moving, moving. We're moving through the moment instead of being in each. And it's ironically, it isn't each moment. There's only one moment always. But we're sort of we're skirting through it, overlooking it, displacing it with movement. And movement can be very mesmerizing. And that's why we wanted to give special attention to this center today. It can be very mesmerizing. Look at me. Look how much I'm getting done. Look at me moving, doing, appearing to be efficient and functional and effective. And I am a person moving. Look at me. And it's not so much showing off, but there's this sensation of I'm actually, you know, it's me and I'm moving, and this is satisfying to be like that. And it's also normal. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But so all the centers run away with awareness. And the moving center is perhaps one of the most obvious. And one more thing I'll say, Mihai, is that I see you turned it around. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Peter.
Welcome. Is that the moving center is actually broken down into two parts in this fourth way system. You could say, on the one hand, we could say half of this center is the moving center and the other half is the instinctive center. From another perspective, there are four parts to each center: an instinctive part, a moving part, an emotional part, and an intellectual part. Can be talked about terminology-wise either way. I usually break them into four parts each. When I speak about them, just from having done that for many years in my experience, Gurdjieff would often explain that they were sort of two halves of one center with different operations. So this is just the framework, the theory. This is good for observation. Do you notice two separate centers, an instinctive and a moving center in yourself? Or do you notice just one kind of operation with this combined functionality? This is something to observe for yourself and ask yourself. And that's true of each center, so that each center actually could be broken down into an instinctive, a moving, emotional, and an intellectual part. This gets more nuanced and more detailed and takes time to delineate all these differences. That's the general framework.
So the moving center comes blank slate. That's why a baby cannot do anything in terms of the moving center. So yeah, all right. So let's break it down practically. So the Jack of Spades, the moving part of the moving center, is once we have learned the movement. Once we have learned the movement, now it happens without attention automatically. And this is designed for optimization of life, because if we can drive car, listen to music, have a deep conversation. So that's the Jack of Spades. Moving part of the moving center is driving, is doing all these things. Walking, again, it's an example of anything. Like even something that is very complex, like I used to be a tennis player. So it took effort and attention and other parts of the center to learn how to play tennis. But now I can go and the moving center is playing tennis very well. And I can be in total imagination, and play tennis very well, very complex movements, like a skater, athlete, So anyway, that's the function of the Jack of Spades for life, for survival, for getting things done. Everything that we can do now, we initially couldn't do it. Also, the talking and making sounds and making words. This is also a function of the moving center. Although, we are taught as a kid, oh, this is a yellow, and so there's the idea of a concept, which is the intellect now, but the actual articulating and learning a language, a new language. We have this
Writing, right?
writing,
Not
yeah,
thinking,
writing,
right?
yes, writing, typing. At some point, not a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago, I was working with someone and I didn't know how to do this American blind typing. I didn't know. So I was like, and somebody said, dude, you can't work for me like this. You need to learn this program. So I learned this, I don't know, Mavis teaches typing. And it was like, so to my surprise, after like a few weeks, I was like, so you see, but initially I had to catch each one of them. So, okay, that part of the moving center that is putting effort to learn, yeah, when I learn how to type that, or when you learn how to write within the thing when you are at first grade, or when I was with my tennis coach, he was like, no, try to hold it like this and try to do this and be careful here and all that, and required a lot of attention in the moving center. That is the King of Spades. The King of Spades, the intellectual part of the moving center. This is where we learn a movement. When I ride a bike, initially it's like, whoa, Joe, do this and do that. And so, yeah, I think it becomes now more clear. We use the King of Spades, intellectual part of the moving center, to learn a movement. And after some repetition, then that movement descends into the Jack of Spades, so goes on by itself, which is great. That's helpful for life. Skiing, and you see it's a different quality when you are skiing. It can be an imagination and this or that, or once you know how to do it, walking. But when you learn, you are there, not there as being aware of awareness, but you are there with sustained attention. So that's a quality of the King of Spades, the intellectual part of the moving center, is that there is sustained attention. The moving center also is not just with movement of the body. Yeah, there's a big part of it. I mean, there's a major part of it, but also this spatial awareness is like when I do archery, and there are different targets and I know my range. So I was like, this is like 20 yards. Yeah, it's kind of 25 yards. So there's some assessment in the moving center. What's the distance? And then again, archery, but I shot thousands and thousands of arrows. Yeah, and now it goes kind of so-called instinctive. It's kind of automatic, but it wasn't automatic at the beginning. So spatial awareness, architecture, this like NASA, man, all this NASA engineering, building bridges, technical stuff. This is like the moving center, the intellectual part of the moving center. You get the very complex psyche thing, and it tells you how to do it, and you need to, unless you've done it before, you need to pay attention and how to put it together, puzzle. This is the King of Spades. From the point of view of the work, from the point of view of our purposes, and in Buddhism too, sometimes they are like, hey, or Zen, mindful walking, or they do this kinshin, walking slowly, and they tell you, hey, be aware of how the foot lands, the contact with the earth, and then how you lift it, and you're aware of each step, and then you're aware of each bite when you put in the mouth, and slow it down. So that is, we are slowing down in order because initially we can't quite be aware of this thing because we did it automatically so much and our attention is somewhere else. So it's like a trick to help one to be more present in the present to some activity by using this intentionality, slowing down. However, that is more of an initial stage, and as a beginner, so to say, there's a trap that now will be like, oh, being conscious means to be very slow and be like a robot and all the time. And so, no, that's not it. And ultimately, one can be aware while the Jack of Spades is doing its thing.
A good example too is which is often given is amazing, isn't it? How much we spend time driving without being present, meaning we're not there knowingly, consciously aware of being in the car, driving along a road that was paved on the surface of the planet. You know, we're not conscious while this is going on. It's just the moving center by itself drives us all around town. And the instinctive center, this is why they're often considered one in a tandem pair, you know, is because both of them are necessary to avoid danger. But this moving center, actually, not only can it visualize three-dimensional space, that's the brain that does that. If you observe carefully, you will see the intellectual center can't do that. It doesn't do that. It's not a capacity of thought to visualize three-dimensional space. Now, often they will work together, like an architect will think about wanting to build something, but the visualization of an object or objects in relationship in three-dimensional space is a wordless process, mental activity that happens. And this is why people who are centered in the moving center, they have this center of gravity, have more of this capacity. And people who are not centered in this moving center don't have such a strong capacity. They can develop it, but it's not inborn the way it is. But another thing the moving center does, if you notice very carefully, it actually anticipates each movement before it makes it. Like you don't just randomly, I've got a pencil right here. The moving center doesn't just randomly reach for there is an instantaneous, almost visualization of picking up the pencil before it picks up the pencil. And it has to do that to know where to reach and what to do. But this can become a way to be in the intellectual part of the center before you pick up the pencil. It just doesn't exercise. Or whatever before you pick up your cup, whatever you kind of know that you're going to pick up the cup. It's weird to say it. Know that you're going to pick up the pencil. Know that you're going to tie your shoe before you tie your shoe. Because otherwise the moving center will just do it by itself. And this becomes, it's because the moving center is so visible compared to the other centers, it can become such a tangible, practical, realizable way to observe and to try to be more present.
The Queen of Spades, the emotional part of the moving center, as we said before, the queens or the emotional part are more from the point of view of attention. There is more attention there connected to interest. And that could be connected to pleasure or discomfort, actually. So there's a pleasure of dancing, the pleasure of running, but it depends. Some people it's not pleasurable, so it depends of the many factors. All of these sports, all of this world of sports, and windsurfing, and you're throwing darts and archery and skateboarding, and so you see the skateboarders, they basically they are putting a lot of effort into the King of Spades to do all those tricks, but they love it too. There's a juice and emotion around that, the pleasure of moving, the pleasure of getting the trick, the pleasure of the flow. So this will be the positive half of the Queen of Spades, like a pleasure. And also there is the discomfort. For instance, you're going somewhere and then somebody is in your way and is driving slowly. And there's this thing, come on, you know, or something breaks your momentum. Or even, let's say, if we have here a meeting for 2 hours and we don't have a break, at some point there was going to be like a little antsiness. It's a little, this is the negative side of the, basically there's too much, there's no movement, too much staying in one place. And then there's the negative side of the Queen of Spades. That's why it's good to allocate a break.
And another thing is the instinctive energy will begin to accumulate when we don't move. And so the instinctive center will send a signal to the moving center, time to move, let's go. This happens at night when we turn over in the sleep, when we're sleeping. Instinctive center actually turns the moving center over because it needs better circulation or something. And the same thing when we're sitting too long. There's an accumulation of energy. And this is interesting. This is true of all our centers. If energy just accumulates in a center without being used, then it will affect the other centers. But this is also a way the centers balance one another. You know, the center will one center will register that another center, the energy is sort of building up or needing to be released or needing to circulate. This shows you how complex we are. This human being, this body, this mind, these 4 centers, so complex and astonishing in how they operate together and create the illusion of identity. And this is why we're studying this. We're literally dissecting all the parts of the centers to investigate and understand that they are not awareness. Awareness is aware of them. And ironically, that none of the centers is aware of themselves. This is something else becomes more apparent as you observe. The moving center can operate by itself, is not aware of moving. Awareness is aware of the moving center moving, but it immediately attaches and it clings to and it becomes the movement. It thinks, this is me moving. But upon further inspection, you will discover the moving center is just like a tool, a device. And in fact, that's true of all the centers. They are more response mechanisms, and awareness operates through them, as Mihai was demonstrating in the meditation in the beginning. It's awareness that is, and this is the thing we want to catch hold of, or this is what wants to catch hold of itself, this awareness, this thing called awareness, this consciousness, this knowingness of being in us.
I want to say a little bit more on here on this before we go to the instinctive center. Is there another aspect, peculiar aspect of the Queen of Spades, the emotional part of the moving center, that one can actually be very much like a person that doesn't do any sports and sits home on the couch eating potato chips and beer, but all of this watching sports, basically watching sports and enjoying sports. That's the Queen of Spades in us that is enjoying the pleasure of movement of other people. And there's still, we are getting this like, whoa, you know, so that's good to know. Okay, in terms of, we touched upon this, that as a specification, just like cars, there are different trims. Our machine comes with a center of gravity, which is like what we are born with, and it doesn't change throughout life. And it's more like we have more our setting, we have more, let's say we are more there, and we tend to perceive the world and to problem solve and to look at reality from our center of gravity. And so a person centered, the moving or instinctive center will be like a man number 1, as they call it, man number 1. Anyway, and so even if one reaches a higher level of being and becomes more balanced, part of the work, and one becomes more balanced, and the centers will be more working properly, and then consciousness wakes up to itself and all of that. One still has a center of gravity and certain tendencies and certain strengths. Basically, the moving centered machines, they tend to be also recognized that they seem to have a more sturdy athletic body. So one can see that even just through how they look, and they tend to be more on the slender side. Emotional centered bodies, we'll talk later, they tend to be more like round, they're more watery, and they tend to gain weight or fluctuate their weight a lot. The moving centered, the moving centered people, regardless of the type, because also we'll talk about types, some types are, Mercury type is small, wiry, and skinny, and the jovial type is like a Santa Claus type. The Venusian also is more like pear-shaped, like this. But a moving center type tends to be more athletic, more sturdy, more, you can see their structure somehow.
And this speaks to Mihai, to this fact that the centers have a physical component and a psychological component. So how we appear is based a lot on our center of gravity, and we're born with this, we can't help this. And we will either take praise or criticize ourselves sometimes for our center of gravity. But so there's the psychology of the centers, and then there's the physiology of the centers. And this is how we can see them, sort of watching one from the outside and noticing also its inside manifestation. Because each center of gravity, each of these centers, stuff is going on inside our head relative to all of these centers. And they are cooperating to produce the eyes in us. But physiologically, they produce our physical makeup, our size, our dimensions, our proportions, our fleshiness or our muscularity, etc. Our angularity or our roundness. This is all. And think about how many people are either overly congratulatory, self-congratulatory about their physique, and others are constantly struggling and fighting and self-critical. And it's all fruitless. It's waste of time because there's non-recognition of the reality of type, body type, and center of gravity. It's one of the freedoms that can come, with understanding this about ourselves and about each other. It's so wonderful when you don't expect someone who's emotionally centered to be moving centered or to be intellectually centered, or depending on your center of gravity, it's amazing how many expectations we have of others and how much our judgments are concerned about these differences just in center of gravity. And this is not taught in school. Or it's not taught in ordinary school.
We can even go a little bit deeper here, like Jack of Spades, center of gravity, somebody centered in the moving part of the moving center. They are more like totally okay with repetitive, monotonous thing, and they can be more like a doer, making a lot of things happening, and are fine, okay, and they may end up in a repetitive job that other people drive them nuts, but it's okay for them, packaging or something. It's kind of feels right. Queen of Spades person, emotional part of the moving center, will be very much a whole of life will be around the pleasure of movement, and put all energy into things that give pleasure, connected to movement, sports, dance, things like that. And they really also, moving center people, they really got to get out. You need to go, you need to move, you need to do this. It's like a dog. If it doesn't, they don't do that. They are antsy, and this doesn't work well. And that's how it is. an intellectual, like a King of Spades person, can be actually can seem not moving too much, or can be kind of can seem intellectual and dry. However, there's like very developed this part of spatial awareness, maybe technical engineering, so maybe deceiving in some way that may not seem moving centered, but they are. They may like this kind of solving things or fixing things or figure out, buying this car and break it down, put it all together, or things like that.
And also the difference between the Jack, the moving part, and the intellectual part, the King, is that the moving part of this moving center is often improvisational. It will just improvise. Like if something, for example, if let's say the leg on a chair in the dining room breaks or cracks, the moving part of the moving center will find some tape, and it will just wrap the tape around it and kind of tighten that tape up, and that's it. That works. That's it. It improvises with the repair. But the intellectual part of the moving center will take the chair to the workshop in the garage, and it will either find some very good glue, or it will put a screw into the fracture of the leg of the chair and then hide it so that the screw is not visible, and sand it over and stain it or paint it or whatever. It will actually solve the structural problem. It will see the problem in the three-dimensional world, and it will solve it completely. Whereas the moving part will just, let's make it work. Hope it doesn't fall again. Hope I'm not sitting in it the next time it snaps. So we can see this in many aspects of our lives, where we improvise versus devise a clever, and many times a clever solution. And obviously you can see why one requires more attention than the other, more discipline, more effort.
I mean, I won't dwell much on it at all, but the countries and cultures, they have a center of gravity. And so America is moving centered. The Romans, they were moving centered, and they had all the system. You come this, you do the town, it's like a grid, like this, and then you put a highway, then you have this, and you have the system, and you repeat. And the Romans, as well as the Americans, there's like the roads and expansion, and come the roads, and then you do this, and then you go there and you conquer them, and you try to. These are more other aspects that come later.
Efficiently.
Yeah, in America, when I came here first time, in Europe, the traffic laws are similar. I mean, they are kind of similar, but a little different. So what in Europe is like, here it is like, hey, just go, come on, don't stop the flight, don't stop the flow, don't, in Europe it's more like, hey, you stop here and you do this, but in here there are laws to support efficiency, and laws that don't like interrupting of the momentum, and from one angle it is smart. There's a smartness, efficiency in the flow of things. Now, from the point of view of moving center becoming a denying force for presence, or being, let's say, operating in a way that is problematic, or from the point of view of bringing awareness in everyday life, so using the moving center to have more awareness, or to use the moving center in order to create a better energy, or to use the moving center in order to dispel some excess energy. Here are some practical things. I mean, first of all, it is useful sometimes to have it's useful to have exercises where you slow things down, or you bring awareness to things that usually are automatic. So all the exercises that we had throughout the months about closing the door consciously, or we used to have this whenever you go through a door seal, to mark that it's an alarm clock, or close drawers, open drawers, not gesticulating. We had this not gesticulating, things like that. when we catch ourselves in a rushing, hurry, do, that's a whole pattern. So that's very good to interrupt that with just stopping either inwardly or stopping the actual activity. Because if it's too much momentum, then there's no space for the work. So sometimes we need, as Ouspensky would say, put a spoke in the wheel of mechanicality in order to introduce more awareness. So there are many exercises based on these things. There's the other element of definitely important, this watching unnecessary wasting energy in tapping, leg shaking, constant scratching or moving or various things. Because usually when we do that, either there's some emotional something happening underlying, or there's imagination. One is imagination while this is happening, so we can use those things to, for me, it's very useful to the beard touching or actually stopping the stop sign. So, you know, there's a lot of exercises we can do that are based on this principle. Some other element is that imagination from one angle, the process of imagination is basically a low level of wakefulness. The intellectual center is weak, undeveloped, and then the head, meaning the intellect, is taken over by this, what I'm going to do and this or that and images. So it's more like the intellect is hijacked by the moving center, just playing out images and things and past and future. So from one angle, that is that's the wrong work. And it's imagination is much more than wrong work. It's a whole state of being asleep. In many spiritual traditions, they would know this. And in the school where me and Peter, we were, there was a lot of physical work. Gurdjieff was doing a lot of physical work. In monasteries, Buddhist, Christian, this or that, they have the work of the hands where they toil the garden. The Zen people, they are sweeping the thing, planting palm trees, digging holes, working your body, and while trying to be present. So working the body, because there are many Mexican workers, they work their butt off, but they are not conscious, you know, so it's not about that. But trying to be present and do the work while engaging the body, this will dispel some of this excessive energy. So at the end of the day, I noticed that we're like, very present, just present, quiet mind, peacefulness, you know, so that's a good principle. And also this can be in mental health also is discovered, like just exercising, man, will take care of a lot of mental health issues and imbalances. Prisons, in prison, there's a lot of pain, you know, there's pain, emotional pain, a lot of pain. And so, but they are working out so much. So that keeps them sane in some way. So some kind of ways one can actually dispel emotional energy. I wouldn't say this, they're not transforming their suffering, but they are dispelling and reaching some overall homeostasis balance through engaging the body. So definitely it is useful to exercise. And, you know, there's a whole, I'm not going to go in depth, but having this zone 2 cardio and zone 4 cardio and things like that. I think it's a lot already.